You've spent your entire life perfecting the art of winning a game you never actually chose to play. You are likely one of the smart ones, the ones who understood the syllabus, who mapped out the milestones, and who executed the strategy with surgical precision. But there is a haunting realization that arrives in the quiet, sterile hours of the night. Your intelligence has not been your liberator. It has been the architect of your own extremely comfortable, high-definition prison. This is the psychological trap that the world's most capable people fall into. It is the tragedy of the optimized life. You have solved every problem put in front of you, yet the most fundamental question, the question of why you feel like a ghost in your own existence, remains not only unanswered, but unasked. We are told that intelligence leads to success, and success leads to fulfillment. But for those who think too much and feel too little, intelligence often becomes a sophisticated defense mechanism against the terrifying rawness of being alive. You have used your mind to build a fortress, and now you are wondering why the sun no longer reaches your skin. We need to talk about why your brilliance is exactly what's keeping you stuck in the matrix, and why the failure you so desperately fear might be the only thing that can actually save you. If this resonates, consider subscribing. Look at the life you've curated. On paper, it likely looks like a series of victories. You have the credentials, the logical path, the intellectual framework to justify every move you make. But beneath the surface of this efficiency, there is a hollow ache, a profound existential vacuum that no amount of digital dopamine or professional validation can fill. You are experiencing the last man syndrome that Nietzsche warned us about. You have traded your soul for small comforts and a predictable pulse. We live in a system that prizes the smart worker because the smart worker is the one most capable of self-optimization. You have become your own taskmaster. You have internalized the demands of the matrix so deeply that you don't even need an external boss to whip you. Your own guilt and your own intelligence do the job for you. The problem is that you have mistaken problem-solving for living. You view your emotions as bugs in the software, your boredom as a lack of productivity, and your existential dread as a chemical imbalance to be managed with a pill or a vacation. This is the ultimate anesthetics of the modern age. We are the most stimulated generation in history, yet we are the most numb. We chase pleasure, the quick hit of a notification, the brief warmth of a purchase, the fleeting ego boost of a title, because we are terrified of the silence that follows. In that silence, the end-of-life regrets start to whisper. They don't whisper about the money you didn't make. They whisper about the person you never became because you were too busy being successful, according to a script written by someone else. You are a biological entity, living in a digital abstraction, and the friction between your animal soul and your systemic role is creating a heat that is burning you out from the inside. If this resonates, consider subscribing. But here is the twist, the perspective shift that your logical mind will try to reject. This feeling of failing, this sense of profound emptiness, and the urge to burn it all down is not a malfunction. It is not a sign that you are broken. In fact, it is the first sign that you are actually beginning to wake up. What you perceive as a psychological collapse is actually a transition of consciousness. The trap is only a trap if you stay inside it. The moment you recognize the walls, they cease to be your world and start to be your obstacles. Most people spend their entire lives decorating their cages, hanging curtains over the bars and calling it interior design. They call it career growth. They call it stability. But you have reached the point where the decorations no longer distract you from the bars. Your intelligence has finally outgrown the system that tried to harvest it. The discomfort you feel is the pressure of a soul that is too large for the narrow corridors of the matrix. You are not failing at life. You are failing at being a machine. And that failure is the most honest thing you have ever done. If this resonates, consider subscribing. To understand how you got here, we have to look at the philosophers who saw this coming. Kierkegaard spoke of the despair of not willing to be oneself. He argued that most people are in despair because they are trying to be a type of person, the successful professional, the good citizen, the intellectual, rather than the radical, unrepeatable individual they actually are. You have been being what the system required, and in doing so, you have committed a slow, intellectual suicide. Nietzsche described the last man as the individual who has no more stars to reach for, who seeks only pitiable comfort. When you prioritize safety over depth, you become the last man. You become the person who says, "We have invented happiness," and blinks, while their inner world remains a graveyard of unlived desires. Then there is Martin Heidegger, who talked about the they, das Man. This is the anonymous everybody that dictates how we should live, what we should value, and what a good life looks like. You have been living in the mode of the they. You have followed the collective logic, the smart path, and in the process, you have lost your mindness, the quality of your life belonging truly to you. Heidegger suggested that most of us are fallen into the world, lost in the chatter and the mundane tasks of the system. We only wake up when we face our being towards death. When you realize that your time is a finite, bleeding resource, the logic of the matrix starts to look like insanity. Why are you optimizing your life for a system that will replace you in a week if you die, while ignoring the only life you will ever have? If this resonates, consider subscribing. Imagine, if you will, a master architect who is tasked with building the most secure vault in the world. He spends decades calculating the thickness of the steel, the complexity of the locks, and the depth of the concrete. He uses every bit of his genius to ensure that nothing can get in. He is proud of his work. It is a masterpiece of engineering. But one day he realizes something horrifying. He built the vault from the inside. He is the occupant. The very walls that protect him from the chaos of the outside world are now the walls that prevent him from ever seeing the sky. Your intelligence is that architect. You have used your brain to build a life that is safe, predictable, and correct. You have locked out the risk of failure, the messiness of deep emotion, and the unpredictability of true passion. You're sitting in a sterile, climate-controlled room of your own making, watching the world through a thick layer of reinforced glass. You can see the trees swaying. You can see people laughing and crying. You can see the sun setting, but you can't feel the wind. You can't smell the rain, and you can't feel the heat. You are protected from life, and that protection is killing you. The pleasure you seek within this vault, the digital distractions, the intellectual puzzles, is just a way to forget that you are suffocating. You are a biological masterpiece, living in a sensory deprivation tank of your own logic. If this resonates, consider subscribing. The system knows you are unhappy, and it has 1,000 cures ready to sell you. This is the second layer of the trap. When you start to feel the emptiness, the matrix offers you solutions that are actually just more sophisticated versions of the problem. It offers you hedonism, dressed up as self-care. It offers you a more optimized morning routine. It offers you a new app to track your productivity so you can find time for what matters, forgetting that what matters cannot be scheduled in a Google Calendar. These are false exits. They are the blue pills of the modern era. We are told to chase dopamine, but dopamine is the currency of the treadmill. It is the neurochemical of more, not the neurochemical of enough. When you try to solve an existential crisis with pleasure, you are trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The system wants you to stay in a loop of desire and temporary satisfaction, because a satisfied person is a person who stops consuming. A person who finds peace is a person who can no longer be manipulated by the fear of missing out or the shame of not being enough. Beware of any solution that requires you to buy something, track something, or optimize yourself. If your healing feels like another job, it isn't healing. It's just more work. You cannot think your way out of a problem that was created by overthinking. You cannot hack your way into a meaningful existence. If this resonates, consider subscribing. So, what is the alternative? It is the move from functioning to being. It is the terrifying transition into authenticity. To live in truth is to stop pretending that the scripts of the system are sufficient for the hunger of your soul. It means moving from a life of should to a life of is. This new paradigm isn't about achieving a different kind of success, it's about changing the very definition of what it means to succeed. In the old paradigm, success was the accumulation of symbols, titles, wealth, status. In the new paradigm, success is the alignment of your internal reality with your external actions. It is integrity in its most literal sense. Being whole, living de verdad, living for real, requires you to inhabit the present moment, even when that moment is uncomfortable. It requires you to stop using your intelligence to bypass your pain and start using it to understand the roots of your conditioning. Most people are afraid of this because it feels like losing control. And it is. You are losing control of the image of your life so that you can finally possess the reality of it. This is the difference between an actor who plays a king and a man who simply sits on a wooden stool and breathes. The actor might have the crown, but the man on the stool has the truth. If this resonates, consider subscribing. I know what you're thinking. Your mind is already generating 1,000 objections. I have responsibilities, you say. I have a mortgage, I have a family, I have a career that I work too hard for to just abandon. These are valid fears. The system has designed your life so that the cost of exit feels like death. It has tied your survival to your compliance. But let's be honest, what is the cost of staying? If you continue on this path for another 20 years, who will you be? You will be the person on their deathbed who realizes they spent their only shot at existence being a reliable resource for a machine that doesn't know their name. Your fear is real, but it is misplaced. You are afraid of losing your security, but you have no security. You are a mortal being on a spinning rock in an infinite void. The only security you have is the integrity of your own soul. The system wants you to think that the alternative to the matrix is chaos and poverty. But the alternative to the matrix is reality. And reality, while often difficult and unpredictable, is the only place where love, meaning, and true joy can actually exist. You are not being asked to blow up your life. You are being asked to stop living it as a lie. You are being asked to slowly, intentionally, start making choices that reflect your own values rather than the values you were told to have. If this resonates, consider subscribing. Think of a man named Thomas. Thomas was brilliant. He was the top of his class, a high-level consultant, by 30, a man who had it all. He lived in a penthouse that overlooked a city he never had time to walk through. He spent his days optimizing supply chains for companies that sold things no one needed. He was the epitome of the smart person who succeeded. But one afternoon, while looking at a spreadsheet, Thomas had a panic attack, not because he was failing, but because he was succeeding. He saw with a terrifying clarity the next 40 years of his life laid out like a perfectly paved road leading straight into a brick wall. He didn't quit his job the next day. He did something smarter. He started to collapse the hedonic wall he had built. He stopped buying things to fill the void. He started sitting in silence for an hour every morning with no phone, no book, no purpose. He began to feel the crushing weight of his own emptiness. He let it hurt. He stopped managing his dread and started listening to it. He realized that his success was a form of cowardice, a way to avoid the risk of discovering what he actually cared about. Today, Thomas lives a much smaller life by the system's standards, but a much larger one by his own. He is a craftsman now. He works with his hands. He makes less money, but he no longer feels like he's watching his life happen to someone else. He didn't find himself. He stopped being them. If this resonates, consider subscribing. This process of awakening is often described as a death, and in a way, it is. It is the decomposition of the ego. Just as a fallen tree in a forest must rot and break down to become the soil for new growth, your systemic self must undergo a period of decay. This is the dark night of the soul that the ancients spoke of. It is not something to be avoided. It is a sacred process. You have to let the smart person the one who knows all the answers and plays all the games, die. The void you feel isn't a hole to be filled. It is a womb. It is the empty space where your actual life can finally begin to grow. We are terrified of the emptiness because we have been taught that nothingness is the opposite of being. But as the Taoists understood, the space inside the cup is what makes the cup useful. Your emptiness is your potential. It is the silence between the notes that makes the music possible. When you stop trying to fill the void with the stuff of the matrix, you realize that the void is not a master to be feared, but a teacher to be heard. It is in the emptiness that you finally hear your own voice, undistorted by the noise of the world. If this resonates, consider subscribing. So how do you actually do this? How do you stop the failure of the smart person? You start by practicing the radical act of non-optimization. Do something that has no ROI. Spend time in nature without taking a photo. Read a book that has nothing to do with your career. Sit in a chair and stare at a wall until the itch to be productive becomes unbearable, and then sit there for 10 more minutes. The goal is to recognize the scripts as they run in your head. When you feel the urge to check your email or update your LinkedIn or optimize your workout, pause. Ask yourself, is this me or is this the system running on my hardware? Start to inhabit your body again. We smart people tend to live from the neck up. We treat our bodies like transport vehicles for our brains. Come back down. Feel the weight of your feet on the floor. Feel the breath in your lungs. This is where reality happens. The matrix cannot survive in the presence of a person who is fully inhabiting their physical and emotional reality. The system requires your abstraction. It requires you to be a user, a consumer, a profile. When you become a human being, you become a glitch in the machine. If this resonates, consider subscribing. The trap you found yourself in, the psychological failure of the intelligent, is actually the greatest gift you could receive. Your intelligence was the tool the system used to enslave you, but it is also the tool that allowed you to perceive the nature of your slavery. You are not failing. You are being liberated. The crisis is the cracking of the shell. You thought you were protecting yourself, but you were actually just preventing yourself from hatching. Everything you have done up to this point has brought you to this threshold. The credentials, the logic, the hard work. It all served a purpose. It showed you exactly what success feels like when it's hollow. It gave you the perspective to see that the matrix has no center. Now you can take all that capability, all that smartness, and apply it to the only project that actually matters, the creation of a life that is truly yours. The initial problem, the empty ache, the sense of failure, was never a problem. It was the call of the wild, the signal from your true self that the cage door has been unlocked this whole time. If this resonates, consider subscribing. You spent your life building a vault to keep out the world, only to realize you were the one trapped inside. But the walls are made of nothing but your own thoughts, and the door opens the moment you stop trying to think your way through it. You are finally failing at being a machine, which means you are finally beginning to succeed at being a human. Don't go back to sleep. The world doesn't need more smart people who know how to win the game. It needs more people who have the courage to stop playing it. You have become so exceptionally good at explaining your life that you have completely forgotten how to live it. This is the second, more dangerous layer of the trap. If the first stage was realizing that you were living in a system designed to harvest your potential, the second stage is the realization that your own mind has become the system's primary enforcement officer. You are likely someone who can deconstruct any problem, someone who understands the psychological roots of your own unhappiness, someone who has read the books and watched the essays. But here is the brutal truth that your intelligence is trying to hide from you. Your ability to intellectualize your pain is not a tool for healing. It is a sophisticated form of evasion. You are using your brilliance to build a map of a forest you are too terrified to actually walk through. You are a cartographer of your own misery, and you have mistaken the precision of your map for the reality of the terrain. This is the refined failure of the modern intellectual. You aren't failing because you lack information. You are failing because you are using information as a shield against the visceral, uncontrollable nature of being alive. We need to go deeper into the machinery of your self-deception, into the way the Matrix uses your own logic to keep you paralyzed in a state of enlightened despair. If this resonates, consider subscribing. The deeper problem you face is what Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, mauvaise foi. It is the act of lying to yourself while simultaneously being the one who is lied to. For a smart person, this takes a very specific form. You convince yourself that because you understand why you are stuck, you are somehow less stuck. You treat your existential dread like a laboratory specimen, something to be observed, categorized, and discussed, rather than a fire that is currently burning down your house. This is the great anesthetic of the information age. We have replaced experience with explanation. When you feel the crushing weight of the system, when you feel the emptiness of your corporate role, or the superficiality of your digital connections, your mind immediately goes to work. It cites the statistics, it references the societal trends, it blames the late-stage capitalism, it analyzes the childhood trauma. And in that moment of analysis, you feel a brief sense of relief. You feel above the problem, but when the analysis is over, you are still in the same room with the same empty heart, living the same mechanical life. Your intelligence has given you the ability to describe the bars of your cage in high definition, but it hasn't given you the courage to bend them. The system loves this version of you. The Matrix doesn't mind if you are a critic of the system, as long as your criticism remains purely intellectual. As long as you are thinking about freedom, you aren't practicing it. The system is perfectly happy to let you be a cynical, self-aware cog in the machine because a cynical cog still turns. In fact, a cynical cog is often more efficient because it has a release valve for its frustration. You go to your job, you perform your functions, and then you come home and watch videos about how the system is a trap, and you feel a sense of kinship and understanding. You feel like you are one of the awake ones. But if your awakening doesn't change the way you breathe, the way you speak, or the way you spend your finite hours on this earth, then it isn't an awakening. It's just a different kind of dream. You are dreaming that you are awake, which is the hardest dream to wake up from. If this resonates, consider subscribing. Here is the twist that will make your logical mind uncomfortable. Your intelligence is not your highest faculty. It is your most effective parasite. It has convinced you that it is the pilot of your life, but in reality, it is more like an overcautious insurance adjuster. Its primary goal is not your fulfillment, your joy, or your truth. Its primary goal is your safety. And for a brain, safety means the absence of the unknown. Your mind fears the void of authenticity more than it fears the slow death of the system. Why? Because the system is predictable. The system is a known quantity. Even if it makes you miserable, it does so in a way that your mind can calculate and manage. The failure of the intelligent person is the failure to recognize that the most important parts of life, love, creation, sacrifice, presence, are fundamentally illogical. They cannot be optimized. They cannot be hacked. When you try to use your intelligence to solve the problem of your existence, you're like a man trying to hear music by looking at a sheet of paper. You can see the notes, you can understand the theory, but you will never hear the melody. Your mind is trying to protect you from the chaos of actually feeling your life, and in doing so, it is keeping you in a state of perpetual emotional malnutrition. You are starving for reality while gorging yourself on the idea of it. If this resonates, consider subscribing. To break this cycle, we have to look at the philosophy of the unreasonable. Albert Camus spoke of the absurd, the conflict between the human longing for order and meaning and the silent, unreasonable world. Most intelligent people try to solve the absurd by creating more order. They try to find a system of meaning, a philosophy that makes sense. But Camus argued that the only honest response to the absurd is not to solve it, but to live in it, to embrace the tension, to be a rebel who lives with such intensity that their very existence is an act of defiance against the void. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the spirit of gravity, the weight of tradition, logic, and societal expectation that pulls us down. He warned that he who would learn to fly one day must first learn to stand and walk and run and climb and dance. One cannot fly into flying. You have been trying to think your way into flying. You have been studying the aerodynamics of the soul while your feet are still glued to the floor of the they. You are waiting for a logical reason to be authentic, but authenticity is, by definition, an act of faith. It is the decision to prioritize the inner pulse over the outer script, even when the outer script offers more security. And then there is the dark wisdom of Arthur Schopenhauer, who saw the world as an endless cycle of will, a blind, striving force that drives us to want, to achieve, to consume, and never to be satisfied. He argued that intelligence often just makes us more aware of our suffering. The smart person is the one who sees the treadmill most clearly, but continues to run on it because they think they can outsmart the physics of the machine. The only way out, according to Schopenhauer, is not more striving, but a radical turning away from the will, a cessation of the game. If this resonates, consider subscribing. Imagine you are standing on the edge of a vast, dark ocean at midnight. This ocean is your actual life, the depth of your emotions, the reality of your mortality, the raw power of your untapped potential. Most people are standing on the shore, huddled around a small flickering campfire. The campfire is the system. It provides a little bit of light, a little bit of warmth, and a lot of smoke that stings your eyes. Your intelligence is like a high-powered flashlight. You spend all your time pointing the flashlight into the darkness of the ocean. You analyze the waves. You measure the temperature of the water from a distance. You write papers on the chemical composition of the salt. You are the expert on the ocean. But here is the catch. You are still standing on the shore, shivering by the fire. You have never actually touched the water. You are terrified that if you step into that ocean, the darkness will swallow you or the cold will stop your heart. So you stay on the sand, shining your light, explaining the water to anyone who will listen. You call this being informed. You call this being realistic. But the truth is, you are just a coward with a very bright light. The failure you fear is the failure of the flashlight. You are afraid that if you go into the water, your logic will stop working. And you're right, it will. You cannot analyze your way through a swim. You have to move. You have to feel. You have to struggle. The trap is the belief that knowing about the water is a substitute for getting wet. If this resonates, consider subscribing. The warning here is for those who think they can escape the matrix through more consumption of anti-matrix content. This is the latest iteration of the system's defense mechanism. It has created a niche for existential consumption. It offers you books on minimalism, videos on stoicism, and podcasts on deep psychology, all designed to make you feel like you are progressing while you remain exactly where you are. Stoicism, in particular, has been weaponized by the system. It has been turned into a productivity hack, a way to endure a soul-crushing job without complaining. Don't let it bother you, the modern watered-down Stoicism says. Control your internal reaction. But sometimes the only sane reaction to an insane situation is to be bothered. Sometimes the most stoic thing you can do is to leave the room. The system wants you to be a well-adjusted prisoner. It wants you to use your intelligence to find peace within the cage. But true peace, the peace of the new paradigm, is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of integrity. It is the peace that comes from knowing that you are no longer a divided being. It is the end of the war between your smart persona and your starving soul. Beware of any philosophy that teaches you how to tolerate the intolerable. That isn't wisdom. It's a surrender disguised as a virtue. If this resonates, consider subscribing. Entering the new paradigm requires a transvaluation of all values, as Nietzsche put it. You have to stop valuing certainty and start valuing aliveness, In the old paradigm, the goal was to be right, to be safe, and to be successful. In the new paradigm, the goal is to be here. Presence is the ultimate threat to the matrix. Why? Because the system runs on future tension and past guilt. It requires you to be constantly looking toward the next milestone or regretting the last failure. It requires you to live in a state of not yet. Authenticity is the radical decision to live in the already. It is the realization that you do not need to achieve your way into being worthy of your own life. You are already the protagonist. You are already at the finish line of the only race that matters, the race to be yourself. This isn't about being happy in the superficial dopamine-driven sense. It's about being heavy, having weight, having substance, having a here-ness that cannot be shaken by the fluctuations of the market or the opinions of the they. Oos. Nay, when you are integrated, your intelligence becomes a servant of your heart rather than its jailer. You use your mind to navigate the world, but you allow your soul to choose the destination. If this resonates, consider subscribing. I can hear the insurance adjuster in your head again. This sounds great in theory, it says, but how do I pay the bills? How do I deal with the fact that I've spent 15 years building a life I now realize is a facade? Is it even possible to change without losing everything? These are the objections of the threshold. They are the final gatekeepers of the old life. And I will not lie to you, there is a cost. There is always a cost. You cannot become who you are meant to be without sacrificing who you have been. But I want you to look at the people at the end of their lives, the people in the hospice wards, the people whose logic has finally run out. They don't regret the money they lost, or the status they sacrificed, or the times they looked foolish in the eyes of the system. They regret the times they were smart instead of brave. They regret the decades they spent optimizing a life they didn't even like. They regret the conversations they didn't have because they were too busy being professional. Your fear of losing everything is a hallucination. You don't have anything. You are a temporary arrangement of atoms in a universe that is billions of years old. The only thing you truly possess is your experience of the present moment. To sacrifice that for security is the only true failure. If this resonates, consider subscribing. Consider the story of Sarah. Sarah was a success story by every metric of the matrix. She was an attorney at a top firm, a woman whose intelligence was a sharp blade she used to carve out a massive, high-status life. She was smart enough to know she was miserable, so she used her intelligence to manage it. She took the right supplements. She went to the right therapist. She did mindfulness for 20 minutes a day so she could go back to billing 80 hours a week. She was a master of the refined failure. One night, Sarah found herself in the office at 3 a.m. looking at a contract that would help a multi-billion-dollar corporation avoid a minor environmental regulation. She looked at her reflection in the dark window and didn't recognize the woman looking back. She realized that her entire life was a pro-con list, where the cons were her soul, her health, and her time, and the pros were numbers in a bank account she was too tired to use. In that moment, her intelligence, the very thing that had built this life, finally turned on itself. It stopped providing excuses. It simply said, "This is a waste of a universe." Sarah didn't find her passion in a weekend. She didn't become a digital nomad. She did something much harder. She became unavailable to the system. She quit the firm. She took a job at a local library that paid a third of what she used to make. Her smart friends thought she'd had a nervous breakdown. They pity her. But for the first time in her life, Sarah can feel the sun on her face. She can hear the birds. She knows the names of the people in her neighborhood. She has failed at being an elite lawyer. And in that failure, she has succeeded at finally inhabiting her own skin. She is no longer an agent of the system. She is a resident of reality. If this resonates, consider subscribing. This transformation is not a growth process. It is an alchemical decay. In alchemy, the first stage is the nigredo, the blackening. It is the stage where the material is broken down, where it rots, where it loses its form. This is what you are experiencing right now. Your smart life is rotting. Your old justifications are losing their power. The structures you built are beginning to crumble under the weight of their own hollowness. Don't try to fix the rot. Don't try to paint over the decay. You have to let the false self decompose. Think of a compost pile. It looks like a mess. It smells like death. It seems like a failure of order. But inside that mess, a profound heat is being generated. The old stuff, the ego, the titles, the systemic scripts, is being broken down into the rich, dark soil of the future. The failure of the smart person is the heat of the compost pile. It is the sign that something new is being prepared. You cannot have the garden without the rot. You cannot have the new man without the death of the last man. The emptiness you feel is the space being cleared for a version of you that doesn't need to be explained to be valid. If this resonates, consider subscribing. So, how do you inhabit this blackening? How do you move from the refined failure to the radical authenticity? You start by practicing the honesty of the body. Your mind can lie to you, but your body cannot. When you are in a meeting or a conversation or a relationship that is systemic and hollow, feel your stomach, feel your throat, feel the tension in your shoulders. Your body is screaming the truth that your intelligence is trying to rationalize away. Stop listening to the insurance adjuster in your head and start listening to the animal in your chest. Practice the art of strategic inefficiency. Do things wrong on purpose. Be late to something that doesn't matter. Leave a task unfinished. Break a minor social script. The goal is to prove to your nervous system that the world doesn't end when you stop being perfect. The matrix relies on your fear of the glitch. When you become the glitch, the fear loses its power over you. Spend time in unstructured silence, not meditation with a goal of calm, just silence. Let the boredom come, let the dread come. Let the voices of your end-of-life regrets speak. Don't analyze them. Don't try to fix them. Just sit with them. When you stop running from the void, you realize that the void is not a predator. It is just the absence of noise. And in that absence, you will finally hear the still, small voice that has been trying to get your attention since you were a child. The voice that knows who you are when you aren't being smart, when you aren't being successful, and when you aren't being useful. If this resonates, consider subscribing. The trap we have been discussing, the trap that makes intelligent people fail, is ultimately the trap of the external life. We have been taught that life is something that happens out there, in the world of achievements, acquisitions, and accolades. We have used our intelligence to master that outer world, only to find that we are strangers in our own inner landscape. The failure you are feeling is the collapse of the outer kingdom. But this collapse is the beginning of your true sovereignty. The system can take your job, it can take your status, it can take your logic, but it cannot take your being. When you shift your center of gravity from what I do to who I am, you become untouchable. You become a person who can walk through the matrix without being of the matrix. You use its tools. You speak its language when necessary. But you never mistake its rewards for your worth. The initial feeling of failing was just the sensation of your soul pulling its hand out of the machine. It hurts because you were attached, but the pain is the proof that you are finally mercifully separate. If this resonates, consider subscribing. You have spent your entire life trying to be the smartest person in the room, only to realize that the room itself was a prison cell. Your brilliance was the key, but you were using it to double-lock the door from the inside. The psychological trap is finally losing its grip, not because you found a better argument, but because you finally stopped arguing with the truth of your own emptiness. You are failing at the game the world gave you, which is the prerequisite for finally succeeding at the life you were born for. The insurance adjuster in your mind will tell you that it's too late, that it's too risky, that you are losing too much. But the part of you that is beyond the matrix knows better. It knows that the only thing you are losing is a burden you were never meant to carry. You are not a resource to be optimized. You are not a profile to be managed. You are a profound, terrifying, beautiful mystery that is currently unfolding in a silent universe. Stop explaining the mystery. Stop analyzing the water. The door is open. The ocean is waiting. It is time to stop being smart and finally, for once, be real. If this resonates, consider subscribing.